I woke up, had to pinch myself. Am I still in a dream? Is this really a thing? I got no place to be. I got my wife and seat in there right next to me. What a hand, Lord, I've been dealt. Yeah, could have been different. It could have been. I could have had weekends off the deep end, cause I ain't want a man up, rather decent. I could have been hustling on the street corner. I could be living on the street. I could be living in the place.
Okay, so the entire country is talking about the NFL, and man, that ship is sinking quick. The right's protesting in some cases because the players are kneeling. The left is protesting because Colin Kaepernick doesn't have a team. And I mean, my gosh, the league must just be sitting there and the owners just smashing their heads against the wall, not knowing what to do because they're in a no-win situation. So you know what we're going to do with that? Nothing just yet. This is where we get back into that policy of the podcast that it's just not a reactionary show. I feel like this story is still being told, so we're going to hang off for a little bit longer and obviously talk about World War I. My friend Ruslan is an immigrant and a hip-hop artist out of San Diego. Came over here speaking Russian and really had to start over at a young age. And is a member of a group of people that had a horrific genocide done to them that the United States still will not officially recognize. I'm going to let him talk more about that, but if you don't know about the Armenian genocide of World War I that continued on in pockets to the 1980s and I believe a little bit of the 90s, this is going to be pretty eye-opening for you. Man, I mean, we just kind of keep going back to World War I. World War II obviously is the famous one, but there's so many things geopolitically that World War I set up that are still going on right now that's actually probably an episode coming up in the next couple of weeks. By the way, going to get back to twice a week. And can I go ahead and say this? I'm going to go ahead and say it. I can't give any details right now, but I'm going to be returning to radio in October. I really, really didn't ever see myself doing that, but it's the perfect partnership, and I will give you more details as they come out. Also, looks like I may be on up to a total of 5 podcasts, so those details will be emerging a bit later. Let's do this show, and I'll fill you in on the rest later on. Okay, my name is Seth Tower Hurd. This is an immigrant, entrepreneur, hip-hop artist from Eastern Europe who embodies the best of America. Let's do it. Let's be neighbors again.
And if we can't walk in love, we're a noisy little gong, a bitter little song that a bully sings out of key. And if we can't walk in peace, we'll forget about the least of these. A mother crying on her knees for a boy who's locked away. There's a voice calling me.
Okay. With my friend Ruslan, rapper out of San Diego, Southern California in general. We're going to start off by talking about, first of all, when I say the Armenian, most people probably don't even know what that is. They're like, is that a kind of hip hop? Is that a religion? What is this Armenian thing? I mean, how often do you get that? I know that there's a lot more, immigrants and people with similar roots in Southern California, but how often do you get that? Like, what does that word even mean? Because, there's this fight in the United States over what the history is here. So if you want to just jump in right there.
Yeah, I think nowadays people are more familiar with Armenian culture, and the Armenian genocide and all that kind of stuff. I feel like nowadays people are much more educated. So that's not something I really get a whole lot in terms of like what is like Armenian theology versus Armenian heritage. Like, well, I don't think that's something that doesn't really come up. No.
Okay. It's not. So it must be because there's a much larger population out there.
Shout out to Kim K. Kanye Kardashian.
I forgot about that. She doesn't talk about it a whole lot.
Nah, she does. She reps. Does she?
Okay. Yeah, well, reps. It must be I don't watch the show a whole lot, so that must be what's going on.
I don't either. I'm talking social media and just
her
speaking up for, the Armenian genocide of 1915, and Turkey till this day not acknowledging it as a genocide. And she's definitely spoken up and done some good stuff in that area. And they got married in Armenia. Her and Kanye did like a formal wedding in Armenia with Rich Wilkinson. So I think she's pretty, yeah.
Okay. I didn't know that Kim Kardashian had done anything good for the world ever. So there you go. No, that's actually fantastic, because the United States still refuses officially to recognize the genocide around World War I. It's because we don't want to tick off Turkey, which, international relations
our only ally in that area. So
yeah. Well, international relations get to be pretty complicated because, like, Turkey wants their empire back. Americans have a pretty short view of history, and for 700 years, the Ottomans, held everything like all the way over to Italy and then all the way down through the Middle East. People don't realize that Greece is kind of sort of new country back on the scene again, even though it's a very historic empire, because they were held by the Ottomans. And a lot of what's going on in the Middle East right now is held by the Ottomans for hundreds of years. And so if you could just do just the very quick drive-by Wikipedia, entry of, something as serious as a genocide. And then also, like, I don't know when your family came over or anything like that. So can you just kind of talk about how you got here? And
yeah, I mean, me and my family are from Azerbaijan, which is a Muslim, I guess a country, or back then it was. I think it's much more friendlier now. And so because of the tension between Turkey and Armenia, and then, the genocide in 1915, the ethnic cleansing attempt continued into the late 80s with the pogroms of Baku. And so we immigrated here in 1991 as refugees because of stuff going back to the genocide of 1915. And then like you mentioned, prehistoric, the prehistoric empires that go way deeper back. But it just comes down to Armenia being very proud of being like the first Christian nation, versus being in a center of an area that's predominantly Muslim and Arab. It's created a lot of tension in the region and a lot of tension and stuff for Armenians. And then we kind of are all in the middle of that. To Armenians, that genocide is what inspired Hitler, for the Jewish genocide against the Jews, was the Armenian genocide, because nobody remembered that, and so it's still taking time for people to acknowledge it. Like you said, it's still not really fully acknowledged as a genocide.
Yeah, forgive me, you're going to know the number better than I do. And I might have known this on a normal day, but I'm also writing for Relevant Magazine about First They Killed My Father, about the Cambodian genocide, the new Netflix movie. So I might have my numbers mixed up. How many deaths in the early 1900s around this thing?
They fluctuate. I've heard accounts as conservative as 5 million all the way up to 13 million. So they said that's, it exceeded the Holocaust, but I think that nobody really knows the exact numbers. It's tough to gauge. And
we should mention on the Hitler thing, the Islam of Turkey is a little different, because like Muslims there, the Quran says drink no fermented drink, so they just drink whiskey because it's distilled. It's a much more secular Islam. And but also, like, even going on right now, there's a lot of, when I said that they kind of want their empire back, that they were an empire for so long, right? There's a lot of evidence that they are the ones that are sponsoring a lot of terrorism, because they want to be an empire again. And so that's never really gone away. And, when we talk about violence that's going on in the 80s, it's connected to 1915. It's like, well, how is that still going on? What I think it's hard for a lot of people that were born here to get their heads around is, in the span of world events, that's like 5 minutes, 1915 and 1980. And, China talks about, well, we didn't have the best century in the 20th century. When you have a country that is that old, they have a much longer memory and different view. And unfortunately, sometimes very long eye towards revenge, in the last 70 plus years. Right. So, like, tell me about your childhood. How many languages did you speak? Was it urbanized? Was it rural? Like, what was it like? Yeah, we lived in Baku, which is, ironically enough, a very big tourist city now. And it was, the climate was beautiful. The city was beautiful. And so it was pretty urban. I speak Russian, grew up speaking Russian. Never learned Armenian. My dad speaks Armenian.
and I think he speaks a little Arzi. And yeah, it was cool, man. I mean, in hindsight, like I didn't know that there was a difference between growing up in the former Soviet Union and growing up in, America. I do remember lining up for rations. I do remember water being rationed. We'd get like a tub of water, I think, for a day or every couple of days.
And
I
was that
remember
for
vividly,
bathing and drinking and cooking?
yeah, bathing. I don't know if it was for cooking, but definitely for bathing.
Okay.
And so even hygienically, it's people from the former Soviet Union weren't the most hygienic in terms of, teeth and showering regularly, and that kind of stuff, just because
they're like the British and the
water.
French of Eastern Europe.
Yeah, like just water wasn't available as easily as it is in America. And so I remember all that stuff. And then, fast forward from that to then we came, when we immigrated to America, huge culture shock. I remember the first time I saw a grocery store, I thought it was a toy store because of how colorful and bright and lit up it was. So I literally thought the first thing we were doing when we got off an airplane was going to buy me toys as a 6-year-old. And, just like, wow, like we didn't have grocery stores like that. You know what I mean? Like the capitalistic nature of America was very shocking. And then the people were very interesting. People, as a 6-7-year-old, like people telling me that like, oh, Russia and America doesn't get along. I literally had no understanding that there was any tension. I had no knowledge of a Cold War. And like you had adults telling a 6-year-old that there's like, oh yeah, there's a Cold War. And I'm like, what? Like, this is so, in hindsight, it's just so weird to have like, and it was always like the quintessential, like proud to be an American, American flag bandana, Harley Davidson driving guys that would tell you this kind of stuff. And then the contrast of that and growing up in a predominantly Black and Hispanic community and being embraced and feeling like a minority because I couldn't speak the language, that's something who I naturally identified with. And that's how hip hop music and hip hop culture came into play as a big part of my life. And just that expression, the freedom of that expression, the acceptance of that community to people that are different, was really, it was cool. It was dope.
Can we talk just for a second about the ethnic identity you brought with you? So did you see yourself, former Soviet Union, so did you see yourself as a Russian in addition to being Armenian, or like how did you, I know you're a really young kid, right? But how would you describe yourself if we would have met in elementary school? Yeah,
I was probably, Soviet, Armenian. They were kind of synonymous at the time because Armenians from Baku were much different than Armenians from Armenia, and even Baku just had its own culture, its own slang, its own food. It was different. The dialect was different. So I think it was all different, and it was all, I knew I was different. What I was exactly, I wasn't quite sure. And then in the context of America, Americans are quick to then ascribe race instead of ethnicity, and so then in the context of that, I'm white, and I'm like, okay, like I don't feel white, I feel very much not like a white American, but I didn't realize that until much later, probably into my late teens and early 20s of, the premise of being white in America was much different than being any other ethnicity in America.
Well, another thing, and it's not like I'm just trying to sit here and dog on how Americans are taught about the world or believe about the world, but there is a predominant idea that your country and your identity are the same thing because it's so much that way here, right? Mm-hmm. However, if you look at a lot of places in the world, like the Basque people who have, somewhat their own language, and they're in, central Spain and parts of France, and have their own language and are fairly autonomous. And then you look at, like the Hmong in Southeast Asia and some of like the boat people tribes, when you get into those islands down there, that little circle of the world where there's tons and tons of people that I can't, keep track of. Your country and your culture or your group don't always line up because, like the Basques did have a nation for a little while in the Middle Ages that there was like a Basque land was a country between Spain and France, and it's not anymore, but that doesn't mean that's not a people. So you wind up were you in your south of LA, a little bit north of San Diego. Is that where you were at growing up then? Like you?
Yeah, like that. Well, I'm in North County, San Diego now. I was in the heart of San Diego, in a little area called Normal Heights, right in the center of everything, right off the 8 and the 805. And so, yeah, I think, America has an interesting way of accommodating to an extent, but there being a healthy pressure to assimilate and take on Western values, which I don't think we mind. We liked America. Like America was lit. You know what I mean? Like you got opportunity to get a job and opportunity to upward mobility, so you can start as an immigrant with nothing on welfare, government assisted full, food, and actually make something of yourself and buy a car and buy a house and, all these different things. And so we were with it, it was dope. It is dope.
Okay, I will never try to fix anything mid-interview ever again. That's kind of broken. Okay, so hopefully I'll be able to splice that together. And, that's something that growing up, part of my extended family came over from Laos, and my mom's side of the family is so big from living in the same agricultural area for, 150 years that I have, kind of all these married in, relatives and half Asian cousins and that type of thing, and I saw them leave a refugee camp that they'd been in for 2 years, come over. My cousin's grandfather had a PhD from France and had been very successful in Laos, and come over and have to start over cleaning Sears on the third shift. And you know what? I mean, is that unjust that they wouldn't accept his education? Absolutely, especially because it's a European education. But the whole family's doing amazing. I mean, these guys are the American dream. And like when I've taught college in the past, I get frustrated sometimes with the lack of work ethic, particularly of suburban American white upper middle class students. Cause I'm like, you just don't have any fire. What's wrong with you? Why do you not try harder? And I grew up in a very blue collar area where, my first job was digging fence post holes. Like that's my first job when I was, 14 years old.
Yep.
And so, a lot of times, like I say, that the American dream is much more alive and well in immigrants than it is in native-born Americans. And that's a fact. That's a fact, because you have two extremes, right? You have one extreme where you're talking about suburban, upper middle class, upper class, just apathy. You have everything. You never go without food. You never go without shelter. You never go without a want or a need. You get the latest video games. You get the latest console. You go to the coolest schools, right? And you're just completely numb to anything outside of your experience. That's a reality for a lot of people. And then you have the other side where you're kind of like, oh man, base case scenario, I'm a blue collar worker working on a mill, and that's it, right? And then you have that extreme. And sometimes when someone comes in from a very different perspective and a very unique view, where like the opportunity level, you just become numb to it. Sometimes a lot of Americans become numb to it, whether you're blue collar, lower middle class, lower class, or you're upper middle class. You don't really know what you have, and you take it for granted. Yeah. And that's why immigrants be getting it. You know what I'm saying? Like across the board, like there's zero room for apathy. There's zero room for complaining. There's zero room for being depressed about things you can control and fix. You just go get it.
You just go get it.
I know we can't work like this, but statistically, an immigrant, I've said this before, and I'll probably get in trouble with somebody for it, but statistically, an immigrant is 8 times more likely to start a company and hire other people.
There you go.
I mean, there are people who have been, I mentioned somebody on a previous episode that's here in Kenosha. I know who he is because he actually physically threatened me because he's a drug addict, and I just kind of crossed paths with him. Dude put his motorcycle down when he was drunk. Has been defrauding the disability system for over 20 years. There's nothing wrong with him other than he just smokes weed and does other drugs all day, and he completely lives off the American taxpayer dime. When we talk about deporting people, I'm like, how about that guy? How about that guy? And we replace him with an immigrant that hires somewhere. 20 people. There's nowhere to send him back to, but let's send him somewhere.
Somewhere. Send him to North Korea.
I feel like a terrible person for laughing at that.
They'll take him.
They probably would send him back, like.
Nah, they'll feed him. You never see those documentaries of the people that deflect to North Korea, the Americans that deflect.
No way.
There's a bunch that go to North Korea. Like,
why?
because they do something stupid in the military and don't want to be held accountable.
Oh, and so they're rock stars because North Koreans hate. They get to be propaganda machines.
Yeah,
Oh,
but they're
man.
they're treated well and they assimilate to the culture and learn the language perfectly. And like, there's several documentaries about it on Netflix, and they're amazing. So they would embrace it. They would embrace them.
Dude, as a '90s Bulls fan, and somebody who did genuinely love Dennis Rodman when he was part of that second three-peat, I'm ready for Kim Jong-un to just keep him. I mean, the fact that he's apologizing for, and trying to explain away mass famine that's happened in that country is just completely inappropriate. I mean, that guy has no, I guess in the 90s we knew he had no grip on reality, but still. So getting back to your own story here, man, and particularly around the stuff around the genocide, there is an effort every year to force the United States. I mean, this is like, Holocaust denier stuff. If somebody's a Holocaust denier, we're like, you are a racist whack job. If somebody denies the Armenian genocide in World War I, we're like, well, I guess that's our official policy.
It's like, oh, no, those numbers are exaggerated, and it was really just casualties on both fronts. Like, that's how they spin it. There's casualties on both fronts, and it's like, no, that's not what that was. It was deep.
Oh, okay, fine. There were casualties on both fronts. It was like 500 to 30 million.
Right. Yeah, that's how they spin it. Because I do think Turkey, lost like 100,000 or 200,000 people in that whole exchange. So, not to minimize that, but they were much different casualties. Those were soldiers. Those were, you know what I mean?
Those are not children.
Those are not women and children.
Yeah.
And civilians. So a bit different.
And there's a difference in dying because you fought, even if you got forced in the military, and somebody killing you because of your ethnicity, your identity, your your beliefs. And on the Hitler thing, people unfortunately ascribed Christianity to Hitler. He was much more into like occult stuff, but he liked the fact that Muslims killed people. Like, he liked the fact that they got away with it, but he also just liked the Muslim culture of like purifying, of just throwing people off of buildings and stuff. He was into that. And actually, his long-term plan was to have peace with Islam, basically, because even though they weren't white, he was kind of down with it or whatever. Did you get your head around this at a young age? Like, when did your parents start to talk to you about, who you were and where you came from? Because I think about when I'm 5, 6, 7 years old, I'm growing up with kids who, some of them did see people get their heads cut off and killed in their villages, or at least their parents did. Growing up on a bunch of Laotians. Like, when
I think my parents told me, they told me we were refugees. I didn't quite understand what that meant. A lot of it, honestly, I learned. As a kid, I was in Armenian Orthodox church, and that's kind of just what we did culturally. And that's where I really started learning and understanding about the genocide. And then like, what happened? They did what? So what? Why? And like at maybe 7 or 8, and still not really fully understanding it. And it really my full story didn't really hit me till probably like my mid-20s, when I really was like, because you grow up with your own story and you're numb to your own narrative until you kind of, this is the story. People ask me where I'm from, I tell them, but then when you actually stop and say, man, let me do some Googles and let me research and let me figure out these things as an adult, then you're like, holy smokes, like this joint is crazy. Like, I'm out here on some like will of God, just the way this all lined up is wild, for me. And I think my life is the evidence that there is a God, that he's personal and that he cares and that he is engaged enough to navigate me to this point. So I think that's always like a really real reminder of my faith, of my faith, even though I wasn't a Christian going to high school and getting saved. It was definitely a reminder of like, oh man, this is real.
Yeah. Culturally, growing up around a lot of Black and Hispanic people, was the fact that you went to an Orthodox church and spoke Russian and stuff like that. You said you were, everybody's pretty cool, like, because everybody's kind of broke and trying to figure it out, or how did you kind of slide into that culture?
This is going to sound weird, but I was trying to bring my Black friends to my Armenian Orthodox church and didn't quite understand that it was only for Armenians. So then this is going to sound weird, but I found that the Black community tend to be much more embracing and open-minded of other cultures than Armenians were. And Armenians have this like, yeah, we were the first Christian nation. And it's like, okay, like, why is that significant? Because it is, you know, like, all right, like, cool. Shouldn't we love everybody and be in relationship and, you know what I mean? Like, whatever. Yeah. And so I was the kid, I was like the weird kid that was like attempting to bring my Black friends to Armenian church. And they just didn't, you know, and I didn't get it. Like, I didn't get how nationalistic that was, you know, that like we had like Armenian youth group, you know, I didn't understand that was like for Armenian kids only, you know, like, and it would like, yeah. So I didn't get it. I honestly didn't get it. And I found Black people to be much more embracing and loving in a lot of ways than my own people, I would say at times.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting in this era of, you know, cultural appropriation where like that being the big buzz term that Macklemore basically has to apologize for winning, you know, album of the year over Kendrick Lamar, which was really dumb, right? But
he doesn't have to apologize. He chose to apologize.
He chose to apologize.
Yeah. Which was not a good look.
You would have just left it alone.
I just would have left it alone. Or if you're going to apologize, then bring him up there and give him the Grammy. I
was going to say, why not do it? Like, if you really think that, then just hand it off. You know, I mean, a little more control than the Best Picture last year, where they got the movie wrong or whatever. You know, you saw that, right? Like, La La Land, and then like somebody came out and they're like, actually, you know, Moonlight won. They're like, hey guys, get up here. You would have just left that alone. You know, I don't get it because, you know, my dad's side of the family, I'm in the process of getting my paperwork filed for the Cherokee Nation. My grandfather didn't file his kids because it was the 1950s, and he lived in an area where the KKK was pretty prevalent. So the paperwork went away, and I'm like, I'm going to go ahead and get that back, you know? But it's so funny, like, as I get to know more people in the Native community, like when they're screaming about like, oh, well, it's cultural, like anything with like a headdress is cultural appropriation. And I'm like, dude, you're Chickasaw. You're from Alabama. Headdresses are in Montana. That's not your culture. Like you wearing, if you want to go down that road,
right? You
as an Alabama native, like Indian, wearing, you know, or having anything to do with a headdress from another sovereign nation that your ancestors could not possibly have gotten to before the horse was introduced to North America. Like that, if you want to play that game, okay, then we're all going to get that crazy. Then back off the headdress thing. But like, how is that? I mean, has that come up being it's like, I guess you're not, as far as your look, you're not white in what we think of as North American white, which is Irish, German, British, right? I mean, you definitely kind of have a different kind of like look to your bone structure and stuff. But have you come across that, like, as this has become, you know, like more and more conversation of what is and isn't cultural appropriation?
I think I've just been more sensitive about it now as we're in a weird place, you know, not a weird place, but a more confrontational place in terms of cultural appropriation. And so, you know, I think the worst, most obvious example of it is like a Iggy Azalea, you know, where you have someone that's like, you know, clearly from Australia, 6 foot tall, blonde hair woman rapping like a girl from Atlanta and putting on an accent, right? Like that's the most, like that's the biggest example of cultural appropriation. But I don't know, clearly Black music has influenced all music. If we're going to talk specifically pop music, blues, R&B, jazz, that's all Black music, and that all goes back to the Black church. That's undeniable at this point. Anybody that's taken a history of music class, you know, even the 4/4 beat, all these things, you know, post Mozart, post British, you know, classical music, like a lot of this stuff, folk music, all this goes back to the Black church. All of this goes back to Muddy Waters and all these different, you know, Black icons, rock and roll music. So at this point, everything is going to be Black cultural appropriation if we're going to get technical. But I think we come down a bit harder on it in the context of hip hop. But I don't know if what, you know, I don't know if what Justin Timberlake and Macklemore is doing is any different than what any other rock band did, but then what the Rolling Stones did, you know, like they were, or Elvis did. Like, it's just that back then people weren't as outspoken about it publicly, and we didn't have as big of a voice about it. But it's been happening forever. Black people contribute the flyest things to culture, and the rest of society, not just white people, but all of society. Hip hop is huge in Asia. Hip hop is huge in Russia right now. All of society loves it and eats it up and embraces it. I think there is a way to do it with a level of respect, you know, and I think there's a way to do it where it's like, okay, this is a complete joke. Like Iggy Azalea, I'm sure that girl's talented and she has some value in what she does, but like, yeah, like, this is not real. Like, we could tell this is not, at least with a Macklemore, you can tell like, oh, he actually cares about social issues and he cares about music, and he's not rapping in a, you know, a Southern accent. He's rapping like a guy from Seattle, Washington. His voice sounds like the way he speaks, right? It's who he really is. And so I think that therein lies the tension of all that. And there's a difference between white privilege and white guilt. Like, white people don't have to feel guilty for what happened. They need to be aware and know that there's privilege and know these different things, but they don't necessarily have to feel guilty for winning a Grammy for best rap album. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's not your fault. Like, you put out a good album. Yes, Kendrick's album was better, so give Kendrick the Grammy. You know, don't send him a text and then screenshot it. Yeah, that's where white guilt comes in. You know, and that's where you look foolish. You know.
Yeah, you know, and that's something I want to get somebody who's probably going to go much further than you will on the podcast to just kind of talk through them with that. Like, you know, Black Lives Matter came out and it was like, you know, their demands. And every time I bring up Black Lives Matter, I got to say, I felt much differently about the movement once Shaun King came into it, because I knew him before he was like a celebrity. And every person should be asking some very serious questions about the money he's raised and where it went. Because it didn't make it to Haiti in a lot of cases. You know, before he was a Black Lives Matter guy, he was like the social media pastor and all about raising money and stuff like that. And there's some very, very serious moral implications as to what went on in that era. So
I'm not too familiar with Shaun King outside of just his social media stuff. I will say that I think if we look at the Black Lives Matter demands, and when I've actually brought them up with law enforcement, they're all very reasonable. Oh, well, like, they're not like, law enforcement will be like, oh yeah, we want outside community groups to oversee uses of force, and we want body cameras, and we want more de-escalation training. So like, all my friends in law enforcement, when I bring those things up, they're like, oh yeah, I like that, you know, and they're like, oh, that's what Black Lives Matter wants, and they're like, oh, I didn't know that, you know. And so I think that's the interesting part about even that is like, it's not as when people actually stop and look at what people are desiring, they're not these outlandish, crazy requests. They're very, you know, thoughtful desires. I think
that's actually not the like I don't know if I can find it real quick to read it to you, but you know, there was somebody from Black Lives Matter that just put out something that said, you know, white people, give your house to a black or brown person. Oh,
yeah. No, that was stupid. And the lady tried to provide context for that, saying that she was speaking specifically to a group of white allies who are wealthy, trying to figure out how they can help. And she said that she wasn't speaking to the general white audience. And she went out, but that was a media disaster. I don't think that's reflective and indicative of everybody from that organization or everybody that shares that sentiment. I agree with the sentiment. I don't endorse the organization just because I'm ignorant of the organization and I haven't heard the best things about the organization and their role of being exclusive towards men, especially Christian men. So I'm not too familiar with the organization, but the sentiment. And then, you're always going to have somebody from an organization that says something that's just dumb. And I think that was kind of stupid on her part. And I think she apologized or tried to bring clarity for it, because Snoops did a whole article on it.
Okay, Snopes did. Yeah, I know. I've tried to get them on the show multiple times. Maybe they'll still come on. That's where I was bringing up the white guilt and that type of thing, right? You know, as far as my own family history, because the Cherokee they both welcomed freed slaves and at times owned slaves. The only part of my family I can't account for is the Indian side of whether or not there were any slave owners. You know, as far as what I do, like, to give back or whatever. I'm pretty involved, and actually just found out that a grant came through that I'd helped out with for a nonprofit boxing club that works with underprivileged kids, trains them for free here in Kenosha.
That's dope.
So like 60 plus kids running through this program. Either they're too poor or their parents don't care enough to put them in any kind of other sport. It's the only thing they have available because they can get there themselves. Right. So I both coach and raise money for them. In a year that I'm starting a business and I'm married and, we're, like kind of getting into the season of having kids and stuff, like that's what I got. Like, that's what I got to give. Like I'm pretty much maxed out. And when people want to talk about white guilt, I'm like, so what else do you want? Like, I'm maxed out. I'm giving everything I got. Like, this is what I got. Which almost 30% of Americans will never give $1 or volunteer 1 hour in a year, which is a really low threshold. Like, put money in the can at Christmas. Like, a third of us don't do even that. And so I'm always curious as to, when people want to push the white guilt thing, I'm like, okay, so what else do you want? Do you actually want my house? And I'm not upset. I'm just curious about, like, what else I'm supposed to be doing and whether or not I should wake up every day feeling bad. I hijacked that a bit.
Yeah, I think there's a wide spectrum of different perspectives on that. And I would tell you that my Black friends and family don't identify with that sentiment of what she wrote in that article. And I think most Black people would be like, yeah, no, we don't give away your private property to a Black person just cause, I think most people, I think that article was a bit nuanced and lacked a bit context. And I think she definitely overstepped and said some dumb stuff that I don't even know if the organization would endorse.
Yeah. Well, and I you and I wound up discussing it just because white guilt came up, and it's not for this of you to answer. It's just, and it's interesting that, like, and now there's this conversation about, like, well, you shouldn't discuss something if, the person's not in the room, So I mentioned the Chickasaw tribe. Historically, my dad's side of the family, I mean, those are their historic enemies. So it's like, am I not allowed to talk about Indian issues without a Chickasaw in the room? You know what I mean? Like, at some point it becomes very, very counterproductive to achieving any solutions. And I'm not trying to get you to defend, something that you clearly don't sign on to. It's just, this is the first time I guess it's come up on the show. Right. Let's get into the music, like the entrepreneurial side a little bit, because like a lot of immigrants, you started a business. I heard you do another interview on it, and, I was pretty interested because this is like, other than like as far as like when people come to me and they're like, hey, I want to start a car dealership, a record label, or a restaurant. I'm like, okay, those are like the three things that fail the most.
Right.
And this is what you do. So, maybe if you want to touch real briefly, because a lot of your fans have probably heard this before, but just for a point of reference, like where you got into hip hop at, and then like, like maybe on the immigrant side of things, like how is this a different kind of business because you're an immigrant and you're beating the odds because dang it, it's hard to make it in music now.
Yeah, well, I think anybody that's trying to make it in music has to sincerely care for music. Wait, is that you or me?
Yep. What's that? Did it buzz?
No, there's music playing. Hold on. I don't know what
that's you, dude.
Can you hear that? Hold on. Sorry.
I can't hear it. I don't know what's going on.
It's like Jay-Z came on in my headphones. Okay. Oh, okay. My bad. That was so weird. It's just like a random Jay-Z song came on.
Okay.
I was like, what? I was like, is this Seth? Yeah, I think you gotta, if you're gonna get into music, you have to be a music guy. And I've always been a music guy from the beginning, from 6-7 years old. We used to get the Columbia get 7 tapes for a penny or 12 tapes for a penny. And, before I could even afford the music, and then turned into CDs. And so I've always been a music person. And I think the people who end up being successful in music are usually much closer to music than just someone that, hey, I want to start a venture. Let me start just like the guy that is a great chef is going to go further than the person that's like a casual cook that thinks he has some good ideas. And then I think in starting any business, you have to apply the business side, and you got to learn the ins and outs, and you got to learn where's the revenue come from? Where's the money come from? How does it actually work? How can you make it with the support of corporations? How can you make it independently? What are, scenarios and cases and best practices for other companies? And so I've just always immersed myself in that world on both fronts, like throwing concerts at 16, 17 years old at my high school, and pulling in 400 or 500 people and building a lineup. And
were you making money at that?
Things. Yeah, I was making, so the city saw me doing it and then hired me and was like, hey, why don't you just throw these concerts for us? And that was like one of my first, maybe my second job.
Because you had a fairly positive message then, or what? Dude,
yeah, because I've
never heard that before.
So I was always active on both ends. I was always active on the business front and the entrepreneurial front and the music side. So I would throw these events and then I would perform at them. And sometimes I wouldn't even perform at them. The opportunities kept presenting themselves. And essentially all I really did is scale that. I got better at it. I scaled it. I did it in other cities and learned how to event plan, learn how to connect with other artists, learn how to connect with openers, learn how to sell tickets, leverage technology. And it's just kind of evolved into where it's at now. And I'm still trying to keep my pulse on everything that's happening in music and where things are going next and how do things spread and, the different ways of doing it, going viral versus building something from the ground up. And, all these different things that I think anybody in any industry should be on top of. And so I've just always been passionate about it. And in that, I want to do my part to give some of the information and the execution back, because I think we're in an era where we don't lack ideas. I think people have tons of ideas and everybody thinks they're a go-getter and everybody thinks they're an entrepreneur and a self-starter. The difference is those of us that actually go do something and execute and do it and can scale it, right?
Yeah.
You're always going to go into every city and find some guy that's the man in that city. Can you scale that? Can you go into multiple cities? How does that all work? And can you ultimately, this whole thing goes back to, can you get people to care? Can you get a couple thousand people to care? And most people can't.
That is absolutely correct. I mean, this is fascinating to me. And, when you talk about building this thing from the ground up, this is something I've said on a previous episode as well. But, growing up in the second poorest county in Illinois, and then, living and working in media around Chicago and getting to do some charity stuff and that type of thing, I would say that, poverty, first of all, is dehumanizing and horrible. But you can beat that with the right stuff, right? What is maybe even worse than that in a lot of ways is if nobody ever believes in you or tells you can get something better. Because like where I grew up, there's a lot of like, well, you're just never going to get ahead that a lot of people thought. You clearly didn't have that. You came over, you talked about, being on social assistance. Talk to me, like, what did your parents do and what did they think? Like, you're a 16-year-old kid making money at hip hop. Like, I mean, a lot of parents probably aren't going to encourage that. Like,
my mom was always very encouraging.
Yeah.
My dad, who is an entrepreneur, and came here, started a business. They split, so he wasn't in the picture. But later on, I think he would just be like, hey, like, you can do it. You just need to set your goals a little higher.
What kind of business did he start? And did you get to see some of that? Like, I mean, did you?
Not really. He started ironically enough, a exotic clothing business, like heels for, we'll just call them professional pole dancers.
Okay.
And they're like high-end shoes and lingerie and stuff like that. And so like he's killing it, man. Him and his wife are crushing it. And they're like, I've kind of consulted for them informally a little bit. But
you had to learn that. I mean, you didn't. So obviously that wasn't a business that's going to cross over into teaching you a whole bunch about starting your own thing at 16.
No, that was just more DNA. I think my dad just gave me the DNA. My mom gave me the affirmation to the best of her ability. And then just affirmation in the community, stepping on stage and performing and people like liking it, knowing that people like it, not being unsure, like, am I even good? And then people like liking it and affirming it, saying, hey, like, you have something, you should keep working it. You should keep working at it. I think those were the differences and those were the variables that, I think set me apart early on. And then again, just, learning and growing and messing up and making mistakes and still making mistakes and just trying to figure out. I've never really had a mentor in this thing like that, like on a consistent relationship basis. I've had a couple of people that have definitely helped and given me like jewels along the way. But I think a lot of it has just been learning it, and just getting in there and getting messy And sometimes it takes a little longer, but I've built it to the thing where, I've been full time for almost 2.5 years now. Just signed a new artist named Jet Trouble. Got a couple other artists that I'm developing right now. And then on top of like putting out my own mixtapes, my own projects, my own shows, and leveraging the YouTube content, and just doing my very best to, again, how can I make people care? At the end of the day, that's what it comes back to, is like, can you make people care? And what's the fastest way to make people care about your thing so that they'll hopefully support it and give their hard-earned dollars to it.
And I'll probably forget to link to it. If it might be in the show notes, or you might just have to YouTube DJ Wado, Ruslan. You get a little bit more into that. And I just thought it was, fascinating how you built that up. And I mean, I don't know, man. If you're just a kid in San Diego, I don't think you have the same advantage. Like, and that's what I usually tell people is I have this unfair advantage in life. I just know how to outwork you. I think fair to you.
Being an immigrant is my biggest privilege.
Okay, unpack that, because that word is so buzzy right now. So tell me what that.
Yeah, well, clearly I don't have an issue with admitting and owning my white privilege, but I think that's more in so how people view me publicly. But the moment they see my name, Ruslan Karaoglanov, that kind of dissipates. Like, they know that like he's not Chad Jefferson. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's like.
By the way, you are a one name entity in my phone. You were just.
I'm just Ruslan. Yeah. So my last name is, people know right away. So that kind of like dissipates the white privilege. So that white privilege for me is just simply how I'm like perceived publicly in society. But my immigrant privilege is the work ethic, is the mentality, is I'll just outwork you. Oh, you're more talented than me? Sweet. I'll just outthink you. You're more, whatever than me. You're more good looking than me. Cool. Like, I'll just go to the gym and get stronger. Like I'll figure it out. And I think that's what, and that comes from being a privilege, because I think Americans, unfortunately, are very entitled, are very into themselves, and think the world revolves around them. And then when you are that way, that's when things go left, because you don't have any outside context, and I'm even now, like I'm pretty assimilated to American culture, but I'm always looking for ways to remind me that like the universe doesn't revolve around me, like I'm here and I'm just playing my part, and I have tons of opportunity. What can I add to the universe? And most people think the opposite, or their mentality is the opposite. They may not openly communicate that, but they definitely operate in the opposite way of that.
It's funny, and this may be because I grew up around immigrants. There's just some kind of tiny inflection in your speech that if we met for the first time in an airport, I think the average person would say you just sounded American. I probably would pick up on it, because like the kids that I grew up with, like the ones who were born here or born as babies in camps in Thailand, like they sound ever so slightly different than the kids who came over when they were 4. And it doesn't seem like it should be, right? I mean, because they're both native speakers basically at that point. Right. But it's funny, like there's just this tiny thing in your speech where I think I would pick it up and maybe other people wouldn't. I don't know if you ever hear that or not.
No, I do. And I think that there still is a cultural barrier for me where like I'm not the guy that's going to like be the best guy to politic and play these games and make small talk. I'm an extrovert that hates small talk. Like let's talk about something. Like I'm not going to sit here and appease and trying to come off a certain way to win over people. And so therefore I tend to not be liked in the music industry or in certain circles, because I'm just not with the shenanigans, like I'm just very direct, and you're going to get a brashness from me that like, I don't care if your platform or whatever, like I'm going to tell you what's what, and that is a very like Soviet thing, there becomes a cultural barrier, because then it's like, oh man, he's, he doesn't like me. It's like, no, I'm just going to keep it G with you. I'm gonna keep it honest with you, and I think I can't even control it. It just is who I am,
Yeah. Let's get into, as we wrap this thing up, I do want to hit on the record here, because I like it a lot. I'm a fan. And I mean, I've been a fan for, over a decade. You and I first connected. I wrote about you, I think was that like 07, 08? When
it was early. It was early. I don't even know how long ago that was.
I mean, if you want to talk about innovative stuff, dude, you put out like, even though this is obsolete at this point, I think it's worth noting. you put out like this like enhanced album where it was like a DVD and like you popped it in your laptop and the album was on it. So it was like, other artists were doing like this thing where it's like, well, later I release a concert DVD. Like you did what people are doing on YouTube now, and you had the forethought to get it like to your fans. And, a lot of artists didn't catch up to this for like 10 years. And so I was very, very impressed with that. I thought that was really cool.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. But just give me a little bit, kind of topically of what's going on with the record here. I'll go ahead and put a clip in at the beginning so people can get a little bit of your vibe, but let's just dive into the content a little bit.
Yeah. The record is called Indie Jones, and it has some of that, a chip on my shoulder as an immigrant, chip on my shoulder as an independent artist, and chip on my shoulder as just a guy that oftentimes feels misunderstood by the status quo. And so I talk about that in different perspectives. I talk about the struggle and the perseverance that it takes to be independent, but then also the reward and the benefit and the, not having to necessarily answer to some corporation or to some, label that's operating off of arbitrary rules of how music can and can't be done. And so that's what the record is ultimately about. And it talks about, there's a lot in there, in terms of my personal story. There's some really cool concept records in there, and there's some stuff about just nothing. And then there's some really intimate moments about God and some of the stuff that I've experienced in the last year and a half. And yeah, it's a really cool, just collection of textures and colors that I think people who love hip hop will love, and people who maybe not even like hip hop will appreciate.
Yeah. Can we talk about when it's, because you're doing completely your own thing, right? And it used to be that an artist, like a really big artist would maybe go 3 years between records. A medium-sized artist would need to do something before that. It's like, there's a couple things going on. First of all, you got to play shows to earn a living partially, like label head artists, and also live performer, right? But it's funny that we're in this era where, first of all, especially in hip hop, if something happens, you got something to say on, you can get it out to the world very, very quickly, which I think is fantastic. But record to record, is it more about there is a business side to it, but is it more about enough things happening in your life and in the world to where you got something to say again? Because you put out a project in August. I'm guessing you probably can't crank out another one in a week. Even if it was possible, right? Like, is there enough going on to where you really would have something to say your fans would care about?
I think so. I think I'm a guy that draws from multiple different things, and there's certain things that I leave out on purpose, and then there's other things that I put to the forefront because of the story I want to tell through the music. And so, I think so. I think right now I'm in a really cool creative space, and what I do is I scale. So I make a bunch of music, and then I strategically release it. So like Indie Jones came out in August. I'm hoping to get part 2 done in December, hit a fourth quarter release, and really push hard to do another one, and just back to back, because I want to hit the market and hit my audience really hard with 2 good quality records, so that then they don't know what to do with it. They have to share with their friends. They have to talk about it. They have to, and then grow the buzz that way.
Yeah.
But I'm already 4 records into the next one before I even put out the first one, so like I'm always a step ahead, and I'm always recording, and I'm always inspired, and I'm always just thinking like, how can this transfer into a song? How can this transfer? What can I talk about? And because I'm not chasing the trends and the latest fads, there's less pressure, I feel, to try to perform and make some type of radio jingle that, hopefully goes viral. That's not the type of artist I am. I make music that's, I would like to think is a bit more timeless and is going to be around and can still have replay value, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road.
Yeah, no, I'm fascinated by that right now because, you see somebody like, I think Future is a good example. Mm-hmm. They can put out records, and he kind of mixes up like retail mixtapes, things that are kind of middle of the road, right? Like somewhere in between those two things. And I do like him. I pay attention to him somewhat. But I'm trying to figure out like just for how ideas get communicated through music, right? For the purpose of this conversation. how many people just kind of like the vibe with an artist like that. And it's like, oh, so it's like I kind of like the feel of it. I think for what you're doing more, that there's probably going to be a lot more people who like really have to be bought into you as an artist, because it's not like, kind of hook or sound driven so much, where like Future, it just kind of feels good. Like even that song, that Gap commercial, I'm like, dude, I would listen to a Future and Cher like EP. Probably not a full record, but I would listen to an EP because like vocally they sound pretty good together. I don't know how much I'm caring about his view of the world though. So it's like I just kind of, maybe we'll wrap up on that question. Like, have you gotten a feel for how much is too much, to where people are just kind of skimming through it because it's new, versus you're really penetrating their consciousness and communicating with them?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure it out. I don't have the answers. I'm trying to figure out that balance between the two. I know the best way to promote good music is by giving people good music.
Yeah.
That's going to be the easiest way to promote and get the word out about something. And so that's what I'm good at, is giving people good music that is thoughtful, that does have a worldview, that does have a message to it. And that's what I'm good at. And not to take anything away from an artist like Future, because I think he's good at what he's good at, and I admire a lot of guys like that. I'm trying to see, even in my own art, like, can I incorporate more modern sounds? Can I incorporate?
Yeah. Well, and in Future, that's just kind of a record for like a different moment. That doesn't mean it's a diss, that people are just kind of getting the feel of it. Like it's just a record for a different moment. For you, it's like a project comes out, or Lecrae's project just dropped today. That's like, to me, that's a headphones record. Go through it for 45 consecutive minutes one time. Future is much more like, he put something out, I'll listen to it while I'm driving. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just music for a different moment. So we're, maybe, is everybody kind of stumbling through this together then?
Because I don't think anybody wants to be the woke, heavy message rapper. And I don't think anybody wants to be just the turn up, I have nothing to say, will you be around in 5 years? I don't know, rapper. I think we're all kind of finding that balance.
Actually, I think a lot of people want to be in that second category. Maybe just not people.
Well, I think they want to be in that second category, but I don't think they want to have a 2 or 3 year old career. You know what I mean? Like, I think they want to figure out, how can they say something meaningful? How can they add some type of value? That would be my opinion. I have no connection or relationship with a Future or whoever, Young Thug, in that area. But I think you're hearing, like a guy like 21 Savage try to do both. He's trying to say some things, he's trying to give some social commentary, but he's also, or a Jay-Z or XXXTentacion. Like, guys are definitely trying to say more while still giving people like a cool vibe that they could ride to, that they could listen to in headphones, that they can think to, and they could also jam out to, work out to. I think that's the balance that I think very few guys can achieve. Like, I think Kendrick has achieved it. I think you could say Cole, Chance. I think the guys that, obviously Tupac, Kanye, it's kind of, there's different colors for different seasons, but you can do multiple things with it, So I think we're all desiring that on some level. I would like to think so.
When when talk about the 2 or 3 record career, or 2 or 3 year career, I do just want to throw in there that the whole mumble rap thing, like, there is some very smart stuff coming out of that kind of movement. And there's some, 19 and 20-year-old kids, they're putting out records that people ought to hear, it ought to pay attention, even though it doesn't sound anything like what, to bring up Jay-Z or, kind of when I came of age. Like, I mean, the Blueprint came out my freshman year of college. That was the gold standard, probably, that I'll measure everything else against. But just because it's not like that doesn't mean it's not really valuable art. If you just want to kind of shout out, like, you got the record out, you mentioned the other one, just how obviously Twitter is, usually the number one way to connect with somebody like you. Any, like, King's Dream, or how you connect with the other artists.
I think
the other artists as we wrap this up.
You can hit me up, Ruslan KD, on all platforms, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, all that good stuff. And then, just give me a shout. I got multiple. I'm usually pretty engaged and responsive if you got any questions. And then, Indie Jones, if you search Ruslan Indie Jones on any way, streaming music, YouTube, SoundCloud, all that, it's available everywhere. So check that out. Listen to it. I think you'll enjoy it. And thank you for doing this interview, man. This was dope.
Yeah. It went some interesting places, man.